Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Deirdre Swinden, and we will be discussing her book, Somnium. And I'm going to let her introduce herself now, so take it away.
Hi, I am Deirdre Swinden. I write horror, sci-fi, speculative fiction, usually with a dark or paranormal twist, and sometimes with a little bit of a psychological aspect.
And that's what we love here. So give everyone a quick overview of your book, Somnium. What's it about?
Sure. I've been fascinated by the concepts of paralysis and lucid dreaming almost all of my life. The idea that people across the world have had the exact same dream, that image of potentially an old hag or what I think is the archetypal succubus sitting on your chest or somewhere in the room, and you can't move. There's nothing you can do. You're awake, but the presence of something else, something evil is there, and there's not anything that you can do to change that. So, that really resonated with me. I've actually had those dreams myself. So Somnium is really about a glimpse into that kind of paralysis, I guess. Gillian Hardie's life, she struggled with persistent nightmare disorder. It's affected her in a lot of ways, and there were times when it affected the decisions that she made. What she really doesn't know at the beginning of the book is that her troubles were caused by a glitch in dream advertising technology that was created and kind of forced on people by the Somnium Corporation. She's also suffering from a recent uptick in the strength of her dreams, and there's a reason for that, but I won't give that away.
Yeah, we don't want spoilers.
So when the dreams are bad, she actually gets a little help, and that's in the form of Nathan Keller, who jumps in to help. He's a nightmare warrior. He's aided by Dex Cooper and a host of dream technology, and they battle her demons together, and they usually win. But as the story opens up, Gillian's trapped in a dream state, and it's a race against time to ensure that she not only survives, but that her survival doesn't unleash another unimaginable horror into the world. So realistically, it's kind of a cautionary tale about the lethal dangers of corporate greed and a society hell-bent on advancing technology. With the focus on one person, on Gillian, I'm basically trying to say that, some of the things that we need to do as a society is kind of take a step back and really look at what technology is doing to our lives and how it affects us in many different ways. It's kind of my way of showing that advancement without thought and without that far-reaching glance into the repercussions of what we're doing isn't without its collateral damage. For Gillian herself, the core journey is really about self-forgiveness, and it's kind of the struggle that we all go through to accept kind of what's good about us, what's bad about us, and meld that together to become a whole, strong person.
Okay, so you touched a little bit about this when you were talking about lucid dreaming, but what were your inspirations for writing the book? And I'm curious, how did you pick the title and the name of the corporation?
Well, the title is actually just a derivative of the word somnia, which is Latin for sleep. I added a UM to it because for some reason that seemed like what corporations would do. So that's how it ended up being Somnium, and that seemed to suit both the plot and the corporation itself. As I said, I've been fascinated with the concept of lucid dreaming. So for me, I had a really terrible dream one night where it was very real. It was literally a specter at the end of my bed that had just kind of sat up, and I couldn't move, and I was just watching it come closer and closer. And I just thought to myself, when I finally did pull myself out and wake up, wouldn't it be great if there was someone who could actually jump in and help? And that's how the idea for the MCL was born. And of course, the next inevitable thought was, well, what if they get stuck? And so, I spent several years kind of toying with the idea and trying to figure out how you would get into someone's head and what they would do when they got there and how the journey would evolve. And at one point, a little grumbling joke about someone beaming advertisements to us while we sleep kind of came up, and it just brought everything together. So that, along with the journey of the self-forgiveness that Gillian goes through, kind of became the core of the story.
Sounds fun. It sounds like you had a lot of interesting influences on the plot. So yeah. So tell us a little bit about the main character, Gillian. What's she like? What's her personality? And what kind of emotional journey does she go through the book?
Yeah, she is. She's a loner, and she's kind of been forced into that. She's kind of had her life disrupted by persistent nightmare disorder, and she's dealing with it the best that she can as the book opens. And that realistically is not dealing with it at all. She is kind of pulled back. She's self-isolating. She barely leaves the house. So it's really one of those things where it's really affected her life. She's had to learn the skill of lucid dreaming to really cope with the level of her nightmares. So she's taken it to kind of this whole new level just in order to survive. And she doesn't know at that point that it really is a survival mechanism for her. So when she's trapped in the dream state, she undergoes a journey where she has to face her fears. Many of those are internal and kind of psychological in nature, but they've materialized as true horrors in her dreams. So when you think about dreams as representation of real life, that's what she's going through. It's for her, it's a journey of self-awareness and forgiveness. And when she learns to accept all the parts of herself, the good, the bad, and the really, really bad, she's able to use those feelings to kind of fight off and fight through these nightmares. And of course, at that point, she realizes there's something else going on and the virus is sentient and she needs to survive or not in order to make sure that the virus doesn't get out to the rest of the world.
Yeah, in the horror books, yeah, it definitely could be or not. So yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters. Do any of them stand out or steal scenes?
I don't consider him much of a secondary character, but I think Dex, who is the Somnium operator who helps Nathan actually get into Gillian's dreams and then monitors the dreams. He was a lot of fun to write. He's really good at what he does. He can read the EKG kind of lines that show up and show what the dreams are doing. He enjoys his work. He trusts people around him without question, which is almost childlike in a way. And so he has a lot of growing up to do throughout the book as well. And he has some really big decisions to make. And it was fun to watch him make those decisions and some of the cheesy moves that we make when we're younger and, trying to plead with God and things like that. It just, it was a lot of fun to write him into the story.
He sounds like a fun character.
Yeah.
So tell us what your favorite scene is in the book without spoilers, of course.
That's kind of a tough one. I think that my favorite scene is actually when Gillian realizes that Nathan is actually not a creation of her own mind. So he's not something just that she's just made up to help her when the dreams get really vicious. And she confronts him on it. And I think there's this really wonderful scene where they're just talking and she just hits him with, "What the heck are you doing in my head?" And that's one of my favorite spots in the book.
Yeah, I guess from her point of view, that would be kind of invasive.
Just a little.
I mean, he is there to help, but yeah, you're in my head.
Yeah. It's like, wait a second.
So what was the hardest scene for you to write in the book?
Well, towards the end of the book, there's a very pivotal scene in the treehouse that she has created for herself as a safe place. And this scene in particular, the journey that Gillian goes through in almost a moment's time, it was really difficult to get it right. And the people around her are struggling to save her life, and she has to basically at this moment struggle to save her soul. And one of the things that I did to try and offset what was happening in that moment was actually to change the tense so that it was real present tense in that moment for Gillian, while everyone else was kind of still still in the real world. She was in her own little enclave of time. And, you know, at that point, if she can't save herself, no one else will be able to save her at all. So that's kind of, it was difficult because it was very emotional for me. There's a lot of my life kind of juxtaposition in that scene. But it was one of those that once I got it right, it turned out to be a really nice flow.
Mm. No, it's always nice when those hard scenes work out. So, what do you enjoy most about writing in the horror paranormal genre?
I love being scared, and it's one of those things that if you can make the skin on the back of my neck crawl, and if there's a good sense of creeping dread, I absolutely it tickles my fancy, I guess. Maybe not tickles. Maybe that's not the right word, but you know, I think for me, I somehow, and this is no detriment to my parents, I managed to watch Dracula, the Frank Langella 1979 movie, when I was 6 years old. So it was.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many horror writers I've interviewed have said something similar to that.
Yeah, you know, it was kind of crazy. I blame my sister more than anybody else. She's older than I am, and she turned it on, and that was the end of it. The closet monster was suddenly real, and he was on TV. And somehow that actually made it much easier to cope with. So, you know, at that point, I knew I liked being scared. I enjoyed it. So I started reading a lot of young adult books that were about, you know, darker things, dark fiction for teens and things of that nature. And by the time I was 12, I had read Stephen King's It. And that was the one that really sold me on writing horror and being scared. You know, throughout most of the book, the main protagonists were about that age. They were around 12, 13. And they subdued this major thing, this major fear. And I just thought that was just the best thing that I'd ever read at the time. And from that point on, I was really dead set on writing horror and dark fiction.
Okay, so what's the hardest part of writing horror fiction for you?
Hardest part, I think, is making sure that, you know, the emotional and the tactile and the sensory details of being scared are fresh and inviting every time. You know, how many times can you say the skin on the back of my neck contracted and the hairs rose up? It gets a little old after a while. So as you're writing that sense and trying to write into, you know, give people that sense of creeping dread, keeping it fresh is pretty difficult.
Yeah, I have the same problem, you know, gotta watch how many moons you put in, how much darkness is there, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
There's only so many ways you can say it was dark. So, did you have any issues with the writing the book?
Um, I have trouble with endings in general. I get to a certain point in the book. I guess there's that whole school of thought: are you a planner or a pantser? And I happen to do both, because there's just no way you can actually plan on what your characters do while you're writing them. So I usually get to a certain point in the book, and, you know, while I can see the path and I know where I want to go in the end, my characters have taken me in different directions. So there's this kind of gaping chasm that I need to leap as the author to find out what these characters that I've created and that have their own personalities and their distinct flair actually want to do to get to that end. And a lot of times that takes a good bit of time to cross. The other thing is that most of the time I just don't want it to end. You know, these people are pieces of me and a character, and some of them have experienced some really heavy duty emotional trauma. Some of them have experienced some great joys. Some of them have experienced things that I can only ever dream about, and some of them have experienced things that I wouldn't want anybody in the world to ever have to experience. So when I see the ending and their stories kind of getting to the final finishing, it's a little bit of a death. You know, you haven't killed off the characters, but it is the end of the story. So for me, it's a little bit of a downer to get to the end. So I think that might be why I have so much trouble, and yet at the same time, when you type the end, put that period on it, it's
It's
such
like,
a relief.
yeah, it's like, "Yay, it's over." And then you realize, "No, it's not over, I have to go edit the thing." So
Yes, exactly.
now we get to the most controversial question is, who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, I love the biggies in the old school. So for me, it's Margaret Atwood, Shirley Jackson, Stephen King, obviously, Richard Matheson, M.R. James, Algernon Blackwood. If you can tell a good ghost story, I am 100% your biggest fan.
Mm,
So more recently, like Susan Hill and Neil Gaiman, all have done just amazing things with that creeping sense of dread that I love so much.
yeah, definitely. Neil Gaiman is one of my favorites as well. So, what do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies or hidden talents?
I think writing actually is my hidden talent. I have spent the past 2 decades in corporate communications, so that's taken up the bulk of my time, and I get to write in the odd hours. So that's the thing that I love to do. I obviously also love reading. I enjoy movies and music, and there's a dog around here somewhere, but
Okay, so tell us a little bit of some of the other things you've written.
Well, I have multiple novels just shoved in a drawer that no one will ever see the light of day.
Mm, yeah, we all
uh,
have that.
yeah, I wrote my first novel in longhand in 3 Garfield notebooks. That should tell you about the time that I actually wrote that. But I recently completed my take on the werewolf origin story. So it's kind of a sci-fi horror crossover where a group of misfits are, of course, isolated and experimented on. And if, as usual, it goes very, very horribly wrong. I've also completed a script that I'm calling Return to Hell House. So it's kind of a tribute to Richard Matheson's Hell House. And that one is about the next group of ill-fated psychic researchers who are trying to understand the Belasco house. Um, and I have ideas for others, but the time is always the big issue,
Mm.
right?
So, do you have a next project, and what can readers expect from you in the future?
Yeah, I'm currently working on actually a project that is a little more of a fantasy horror crossover. And
Oh,
the
yes, tell us about that. That's my wheelhouse.
well, it's set in a fantasy realm, and there is a young woman who is kind of an outcast and a misfit, and she's basically destined to destroy her world, and it's that's the premise at the core, and she needs to go through a journey where she actually accepts that she might be the villain in her own world. So still working on that one. It's definitely a work in progress, but so far the feedback's been pretty good. So I'm going to keep working on it.
Mm. Oh, that sounds like something we can definitely look forward to reading one day. So, I think we'll wrap the interview up here, and I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you. It was wonderful to meet you and chat with you as well.
Okay, and tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
DeirdreSwinden.com, and of course on Amazon under Crystal Lake Publishing.
And if you want to check out her book, which sounds fabulous, you can find the link in the description below. So thank you for being a guest today, and that's it for this episode. And bye for now.